Well, good morning. Happy as always to be joined this morning by Joe diGenova, legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney to the District of Columbia. Joe, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Glad to have you back. On Friday, the big news coming out that a judge, John Bates, U.S. District Judge John Bates, has now barred the Trump administration from ending DACA and saying that they need to fully restore the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. That's that program put in place by President Obama that allows young illegal immigrants, or they were young at one point, to stay in the United States without punishment. How is it exact? And the judge says that the Trump administration failed in its rationale for why it was changing it back. Why does it need to provide a rationale if this is an executive action to begin with?
Well, actually, it doesn't. Let me make a confession here. John Bates, I made John Bates the chief of my civil division when I was U.S. Attorney and then recommended him for a U.S. District Court judgeship. John is a good man, but in this case he happens to be deadly wrong. Let's remember that this is this beautifully named Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. That's what DACA stands for. This is the goofy name that President Obama thought up to violate the law. Out of whole cloth, he created an illegal program with a right to stay. President Trump becomes president and says, okay, well, that executive order by President Obama is illegal, unconstitutional, I'm going to rescind it. He's already said that publicly. That is sufficient reason. The judge is simply wrong. This is something that the judge and two other judges just don't want to do. They don't want to take responsibility for making these children, quote unquote, leave the country. This is another outrageous example of judicial overreach. He says that the reasons given by the president are arbitrary and capricious. My answer to that is nonsense. Get yourself a dictionary, Judge.
But, Joe, why does the constitutionality and legality of this action even matter? Like, let's pretend it was all fine and on the up and up. Wouldn't it be well within the president's rights to remove a program put in place by the same branch of government?
Yes, it is within his. The judge is simply wrong. You know, this is under the rubric of these old cases from the 1970s by liberal judges that once a right has been created by the government, in order to take it away, you have to have some overarching justification. This is the corruption of judicial overreach and how it has infected our public policy. The fundamental rule here is the president who follows another president can rescind the executive orders of the previous president. That is black-letter constitutional law. And the fact that federal judges refuse to recognize it shows why it's important to get Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court.
But everything is going to have to work its way to the Supreme Court, and that's part of what's going on the left is that they're just delaying,
yes,
and continuing.
It's a marvelous game. The left cannot win through elections, so it wins through the courts. Regrettably, this is a Republican judge. I mean, I like John Bates. He's a nice guy, but he's just dead wrong.
Let's talk about another judge, Dana Sabro, a U.S. District Judge, who said that the Trump administration is responsible for finding immigrant parents who were deported and chose to leave their children here,
yes,
or who were released into the U.S. for whatever reason without their children.
Right.
How is this the administration's responsibility if the parents chose to leave their children here and wouldn't take them with them?
This is another example of incomprehensible judicial conduct. I'm not quite sure what it's going to take to sort of get federal judges back into the role that the Constitution gives them, which is a relatively limited one. You now have like 5 or 6 federal judges basically running the government, telling the President of the United States that he can't do things that he was elected to do. That is absolutely absurd. It is a kind of judicial autonomy that has gotten out of control. There is no justification for what that judge did, and yet it continues. This is going to happen until we get a full smackdown from the Supreme Court on the substance of each issue, which is whether or not the president has this authority, and then secondarily, these nationwide injunctions that judges issue from one little court in Podunk. That's all got to stop, and the Supreme Court has to address that.
The FBI has released some documents related to Christopher Steele. I want to move on to him. He's the guy who compiled the Trump dossier, the one that's filled with all sorts of half-truths and skeptical information in terms of how credulous we should be about it. Christopher Steele, FBI documents heavily redacted. We can find out almost no information. This is almost a joke, right?
Well, what we know now is that this is no longer even open to question, notwithstanding the lunatics on CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and the Washington Post. There was a plot, a brazen plot, to exonerate Hillary Clinton and to frame Donald Trump. It's real simple stuff. It's not even open to question anymore. The Steele dossier is basically unverified garbage. None of it has ever been verified. I keep hearing John Brennan and others say, oh, some of it's been verified, but they never quite say what in it has been verified, and the reason is they can't. What's really interesting is that after Steele was fired by the FBI for violating their rules of a confidential informant, they actually continued to use him by having him report directly to Bruce Orr, who was out of the deputy's office under Obama in the Justice Department. And then Bruce Orr acted as Steele's mouthpiece, going back to the FBI and giving them the same type of bad intelligence. And the FBI, because this is what they do, made 302s for every interview that they had with Bruce Orr. So there are like 60 or 70 of these forms, which Senator Grassley wants to make public, but that the Bureau is refusing. By the way, keep your eyes and ears open over the next week or two, or a little bit more. There's going to be more stuff on FISA. It's going to be fascinating. It's going to get very ugly for Christopher Wray and Rod Rosenstein as evidence continues to mount that they are withholding information from Congress and the public merely because they don't want to embarrass the Bureau or their predecessors at the Department of Justice.
Oh, very interesting. We will be looking for that. Jay Sekulow has come out and said that if Mueller subpoenas the president, they're going to fight him all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yes.
But yet, doesn't this fly in the face of what Rudy Giuliani has been out saying for the last week or so?
Well, I think you're seeing a little good cop, bad cop here. I don't expect the president to agree to any interview by Mueller, given the incredible illegitimacy of Mueller's investigation, the manner in which it's been conducted, the people who are conducting it. I think that the president is under no constitutional obligation in a case like this, where he is not accused of a crime, he is not a vital witness, there is no evidence that he has any information. The special counsel has not provided to the president in any of his letters any evidence that he thinks the president possesses, which he can get from no one else. Under existing law, the president is generally, quote, not available because he's very busy. In this situation, I think the president will win any fight over a subpoena. I think Mueller knows that. And I think if he were going to issue a subpoena, he would have issued it a long, long time ago. He doesn't want to issue a subpoena.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the president's in Bedminster. A lot of time to think about whether or not he actually wants to do this. We'll see what the outcome of that is. Joe diGenova, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.